Erin Holtz never intended to become a whistleblower. As a quiet data analyst buried in spreadsheets and graphs, she believed in numbers, in logic, in systems that worked. But when the murder rates in America's most violent cities began to plummet and missing persons reports quietly spiked, Erin saw what no one else dared to notice. What started as a simple data anomaly pulled her into a shadowy world of secret algorithms, off-the-books executions, and a nationwide conspiracy to erase crime by erasing people. For years, the city of Midridge lived under a cloud of violence. The streets were known more for gunshots than car horns, and families often fell asleep to the distant sound of sirens. Crime wasn't just a concern, it was a lifestyle. Murders were reported almost daily, and many cases were never solved. Locals grew numb to it. Deaths became headlines, then statistics, then faded memories. But in the beginning of 2022, a change began. Without warning, the murder rate in Midridge started to drop, not just slightly, but dramatically. By the end of the year, homicides had been cut nearly in half. It wasn't just Midridge, either. Cities across the country were experiencing the same phenomenon. Chicago, Baltimore, Oakland, all of them, long plagued by violence, were suddenly seeing record-breaking declines in deadly crime. The public welcomed the news. Community leaders praised new outreach programs. Police departments took credit for smarter patrolling, advanced technology, and stronger community ties. News outlets ran hopeful stories about a nation slowly healing from decades of bloodshed. Experts pointed to improved mental health awareness and reduced gang recruitment. Charts, graphs, and data visualizations were everywhere, each one showing a steady fall in murder cases. Politicians ran campaigns on the success. Social media echoed the good news. The nation had turned a corner. But beneath the surface, not everyone was celebrating. A few independent researchers, unnoticed in the buzz of optimism, quietly questioned the numbers. Something felt off. While homicides were clearly down, the total number of unexplained disappearances had increased slightly. It wasn't dramatic enough to cause panic, but enough to seem strange when viewed side by side with the homicide statistics. Some cases were logged as missing persons. Others were vague, noted as voluntarily relocated or left town. Even more were never reported at all, buried in police databases under incomplete paperwork and dead-end leads. Still, no one had enough proof to raise concern publicly. The crime rate was down, after all. The system appeared to be working. Hope was spreading. Midridge, once infamous for bloodshed, was now being used in college lectures as an example of smart reform. But beneath the headlines and celebrations, a quiet, unanswered question lingered. Where had all the potential killers gone? And what exactly was happening to those who simply vanished without a trace? No one had answers yet, but the truth would eventually surface, and when it did, it would shatter everything the country thought it knew about crime and justice. By early 2023, Erin Holtz had grown increasingly unsettled. A data analyst working for the Midridge City Council, she was tasked with reviewing crime statistics and identifying long-term trends. At first, like everyone else, she was impressed by the steep decline in homicides. But as she continued her work, small inconsistencies began to emerge. The missing persons reports, which had once been a relatively steady figure, were rising quietly, almost unnoticed. The individuals going missing weren't tourists or lost hikers, they were mostly locals, and more often than not, they had criminal records. Some were former gang members, others had histories of domestic violence or drug dealing. What troubled Erin was the sudden absence of any follow-up in their cases. Names would appear on reports and then disappear again, usually marked as case closed or no foul play suspected, despite there being no body or contact with family. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. These weren't typical missing persons cases. They followed no logical path. Often, there was no investigation, no media coverage, and no public awareness. When she cross-referenced these cases with areas previously known for high murder rates, the overlap was alarming. Entire blocks once plagued by violence had suddenly gone quiet, not just peaceful, but silent. No crime, no witnesses, no noise. It was too clean. Then came the fire at the old warehouse on the south side of Midridge. It barely made the news. A small blaze, quickly extinguished. But when investigators went inside, they found something that didn't fit. Industrial-strength bleach bottles, metal drums, and the remains of what looked like a surgical table. Most disturbing were the blood traces found beneath a scorched floor panel. The blood didn't match any known person in the national database, and the building had no registered owner. The incident was ruled as accidental damage, and no further investigation followed. To Erin, it felt like a cover-up. The more she looked, the more she felt like she was staring at the edge of something far more complex than bad bookkeeping. Reports were being altered, logs were incomplete, surveillance footage from key areas had gaps. Something was being hidden in plain sight. And while the public remained focused on the good news falling murder numbers and safer streets, Erin began to suspect that the violence hadn't disappeared. It had only taken on a new, quieter form. Erin Holtz's search for answers led her deeper into the system than she ever intended to go. With her access to municipal databases, she began tracing patterns across multiple cities. What she found was chillingly consistent. The murder rates were down, but missing persons cases involving individuals with violent or unstable histories were quietly rising in places like Detroit, Philadelphia, and Atlanta. The numbers weren't alarming on their own, but when placed against previous trends, they formed a clear and unnatural shift. Erin also discovered strange data anomalies, locations tagged repeatedly in internal logs, mostly abandoned industrial sites or vacant lots, all with suspiciously low surveillance coverage and no patrol records. Her search led her to a private tech firm called Coverup. It had been hired by dozens of cities to develop predictive policing software designed to forecast violent crime. The program used complex algorithms that track behavior, online activity, criminal history, and social connections. On paper, it helped officers know where to patrol and who might pose a future risk. But Erin noticed something disturbing. Individuals flagged with high violence risk scores often vanished shortly after their data profiles were created. Their names stopped showing up in any future city activity. No arrests, no fines, no hospital visits, nothing. Digging further, she found internal memos between city officials and Numacore executives. One file dated July 2023 included a chilling phrase, "reduce physical liabilities through early redirection." Another outlined the estimated cost of post-incident processing and referred to a department only labeled as Ghost. These documents weren't part of any public record. They existed in restricted internal drives, encrypted and meant to be invisible. Erin realized that Numacore's software wasn't just helping predict crime, it was helping eliminate potential criminals before they committed any crime at all. She suspected the existence of an off-the-record enforcement team operating without warrants, trials, or public knowledge. This would explain the blood evidence at the warehouse, the sudden silence in high crime zones, and the untraceable disappearances. The deeper she went, the clearer the picture became. Cities weren't just reducing crime, they were erasing it by erasing the people who might commit it. And with every layer Erin uncovered, she knew she was inching closer to something dangerous, something that had been hiding behind glowing crime statistics and national headlines of peace. Erin's findings pointed to something far beyond a flawed algorithm or careless oversight. She began tracking financial records, contract payments, and encrypted emails leaked through old data storage logs. Slowly, the full picture of the hidden operation came into view. Buried under layers of false identities and dummy companies, she uncovered a covert unit operating under the codename Operation Silencer. It was not listed in any city budget. It did not appear in government employee databases. Yet its trail was visible to anyone who knew where to look, buried in equipment orders, transportation costs, and non-disclosure agreements. The unit was made up of former military contractors, rogue law enforcement officers, and private security professionals with no public accountability. Their mission was horrifying in its simplicity: identify and eliminate individuals with high threat ratings before they committed crimes. They relied on Numacore's software to generate lists of targets, often based on little more than association, online searches, or historical behavior. Once identified, these targets were removed silently, without arrest, without warning, and without legal process. The murders were never recorded as murders. Victims were made to vanish completely. Some were lured into abandoned buildings and killed. Others were taken during traffic stops that never made it to official records. In many cases, there were no witnesses, just sudden disappearances followed by silence. The bodies were never found, disposed of in a methodical, industrial process using rented warehouses, acid, and fire. Police departments that contracted Numicore unknowingly provided logistical support, often told they were assisting in a secret national security initiative. Erin tracked down a former member of the cleanup crew, now living under a new identity. He admitted that not every target was violent. Sometimes mistakes were made. A man once flagged for gang ties turned out to have left the gang years ago, working a quiet job at a grocery store. Another was a teenage girl whose brother was under surveillance. She was taken after being misidentified through phone data. There were no second chances. The system didn't allow for appeals. Erin recorded every finding, building a detailed map of the operation. The scale of it shocked her. This wasn't a localized problem. It was a coordinated national effort masked by the illusion of declining crime. The public had been told violence was ending. In reality, it had only been repackaged, made invisible through precision, secrecy, and silence. In January 2025, Erin took the final risk. Knowing she could no longer rely on internal whistleblowing, she compiled all her evidence into an encrypted file and sent it to a group of independent journalists known for exposing government corruption. Within days, the leak made headlines. National news outlets scrambled to verify the story. Operation Silencer was no longer a shadow, it was now public knowledge. Documents revealed confidential contracts, internal communications, and evidence of extrajudicial killings linked directly to high-ranking officials in several major cities. The country was stunned. Public trust collapsed overnight. Press conferences were flooded with demands for answers. Families of missing persons rallied in the streets, holding up photos of loved ones who had vanished without explanation. Politicians distanced themselves, denying any involvement. Numicore executives claimed their software had been misused by independent actors. City mayors called for investigations, but many of them had signed the very contracts that fueled the program. Congress launched a formal inquiry, but by the time subpoenas were issued, most of the people directly involved had disappeared. Warehouses used by the operation were found emptied and burned. Financial records vanished. Surveillance footage had been wiped. It was as if the operation had never existed, leaving behind only fragments and horror. Erin went into hiding after receiving several threats. She changed her name, left her home, and disappeared into a life of anonymity. But her report lived on. It had sparked a movement. Investigative teams across the country began reopening missing persons cases once dismissed or ignored. Silent connections were made between victims in different cities. Cases once thought unrelated were now seen as pieces of the same hidden puzzle. Despite the outrage and public pressure, few arrests were ever made. No one was held accountable for the deaths. The justice system, unwilling or unable to prosecute crimes buried so deep in secrecy, stalled and moved on. But the narrative had shifted forever. The myth of a peaceful, reformed America was broken. People now looked at declining crime rates with suspicion, wondering what price had been paid for such quiet. Behind every statistic, there was now doubt. Behind every missing person, a possibility. And behind every chart showing progress, the haunting question remained: how many were silenced, simply because a machine said they might someday be dangerous? The murder rate had declined, yes, but justice had vanished with it.